We've been talking about JavaScript, and so JavaScript is what brings dynamism to what would otherwise be a static web page. So, if you see pages where things happen as you move the mouse around or when you click on something and so on, all of that is happening because of JavaScript that that executes on the page. So when parts of the page are dynamically constructed, then it's JavaScript that's doing that. When you have a menu that you click on, then there is again JavaScript behind that. When you scroll down and the new content gets displayed as you scroll, then again that's because of JavaScript. When you fill out a form and then you get an error message saying that something is not filled in correctly, that's again JavaScript. So anything dynamic that happens on a page is usually because of JavaScript. So the way you put JavaScript into a web page is using a special HTML tag called a script tag, right? So HTML tags are generally enclosed in these less than and greater than symbols, and then you have script, and that opens a script, and then a slash script ends the script, and in there is basically some JavaScript code, right? So when the browser receives this HTML and parses the HTML, it'll pick up the script and it'll execute it, which, as you can see, is going to simply print, pop up a hello world message to you. This type of a script where the body of the script is right there is called an inline script, right? So it appears inline within the page. There are many other ways to include scripts. One of them is by providing the name of a file on the server. So this one says, okay, there is a script that needs to be executed. The content of the script is given by the name of this attribute called src, and the src should give the name of a URL. So this is a URL which is going to be referenced relative to the web page in which this particular element is present, right? So it's all relative to the current page, and it says that, okay, go ahead and get this file called functions.js and treat it as a script. So a third way to include JavaScript code is through what are called event handlers. So many HTML tags can have an event handler associated with it. So in this case, you have a href element, which is how you create hyperlinks, and it has this event called onMouseOver, which means that when you hover the mouse over the hyperlink, it's going to execute this piece of code, right? And this is again JavaScript. And also yet another way is through what is called a pseudo URL, where you have this protocol which often could be things like HTTP or HTTPS. In this case, you have a special protocol called JavaScript, which tells the browser that, okay, what you have here is just a piece of JavaScript code. So there are many ways in which you can include JavaScript code in web pages. So now that you have got JavaScript on the page, now when this code executes, it, as we said, it typically looks at what is on the page, and maybe it prints some error messages, or maybe it produces additional content on the page. So all of that requires understanding what is on the page, and making changes to the page. And it's not very convenient if you have to treat the whole thing as some string which is going to be parsed as a HTML document. So we have what has been done is that there is a nice object-oriented model that's been defined called document object model, which basically divides up the page content into various objects so that the script can simply navigate through this object hierarchy to get at various parts of the document. Okay, so essentially the whole page is, you can think of it as a hierarchical structure, something like a tree, and you have the window, and then what are the things that are inside. So you can refer to these elements using attributes like this. So the document refers to the entire document, and something like a link color tells you a particular attribute which refers to elements that are like hyperlinks. Document.url will get you to the URL of the current document. Document.forms will get you to all the forms that are in the document. And as you can see, forms is an array because you could have more than one form. And by indexing through this forms array, then you can get to the different forms that are on the page. Again, the number of links. Again, the links are going to be an array. So everything in the page you can visit by simply traversing this object model. You can also change the document using operations such as document.write, which simply appends some text to the end of the page. And in addition, you have also what is called a browser object model, which refers to some objects that the browser knows about. It's not about the content of the page, but about the structure of the window and various frames and so on. So let's look at what this means in a little bit more detail through an example. So you have, this is a browser window, and everything is going to be, this whole thing is going to be called a window object, okay? And within the window object, you have two frames, right? So this is one frame, and this is another frame. And so each of them is called a frame object. And then within this frame, you have a document object, which is marked here. And then we have within this document, you have a paragraph object, and you have a heading object, and so on. So the whole thing is a hierarchy, and you can keep going through this hierarchy to visit various parts of the page and understand and manipulate it. Okay, so here is an example of how you can get at various parts of the document. So let's take an example. Let's say this is the whole HTML document, and it basically has a bullet list, which is identified by this UL tag, and each list item is going to be identified by the LI tag. So you can reference these things. So each element in the HTML page can be given what is called an ID, right? So you see an ID here. Now the ID is simply a name. So you put an ID here so that you can refer to that element by using this name. And the particular JavaScript expression you use to get to this is this particular expression that says document.getElement by ID, and then you give the name of that particular element, which is T1 in this case. And then you can ask for additional attributes like node name, node value, a particular node of the HTML may have children. So you can ask for the first child, and then the first child of the first child, and the node value of the first child of the first child, and so on. Okay, and this is how you can the JavaScript can navigate through the content of the page. So JavaScript can also construct new elements by using other methods on the DOM. Okay, so for instance, it can create new elements. It can create some text. It can add additional children to a node, or it can remove an existing child, and so on. And here is some example JavaScript that performs these operations. So you can look at that at your leisure. So now we at least have some idea of how all of the pieces come together so that you can have dynamic pages. But then once you have dynamic pages, you have untrusted code that's executing on your browser, and therefore you need to really worry about security. And that's really what we are going to talk about in the next few slides. So what is the goal of web security, right? So at the highest level, you want to safely browse the web, okay? So what does that mean? One of the foremost concerns is that you use a web browser to visit many different sites. Some of the sites, maybe like your bank, and you really care about the privacy of the information that you provide. And others may be like a search engine or informational website, which maybe is serving up ads and is trying to track you and so on. So you really don't trust it. So you want to simultaneously visit these pages. And in order for you to do that securely, you need to have some assurance that one of these sites is not going to steal information from other sites, right? So you need to isolate these sites. Even if you visit two sites concurrently, then the two sites should be completely isolated. And this is achieved using what is called a same origin policy, which we will discuss in detail in a little bit. Okay, so this is about maintaining isolation between two different sites that you're visiting, but there is also the need to isolate the sites that you visit from the site, from the local machine, right? So if you visit some website, you don't want that website to, let's say, access some of the files on your local machine. So that is also part of web security, but it is something that really comes from the browser ensuring that local resources cannot be accessed by JavaScript. Okay, so we are not going to talk a whole lot about this side of web security, and we are really going to be much more focused on isolating different websites so that one malicious website cannot steal information belonging to another website. Okay, so to summarize, we talk about three basic concerns when we talk about web security. The first thing is authentication. So again, these concerns in security are things that we have talked about. If you go back to cryptography basics, you'll see that we talk about 5 concerns, but the most basic ones are authentication, confidentiality, and integrity. And it's the same 3 that we are going to talk about here. So authentication is concerned with making sure that we can securely identify users and users can securely identify websites. Then there is confidentiality, which relates to how you make sure that the data that's transmitted between the browser and a website is protected from other websites. And integrity, which means make sure that the data belonging to one website is not going to be tampered with or changed by another website. And all of these are going to be ensured using the same origin policy that we will talk about in some time.